Somebody, Land Rebel on the Mac Hike Auto Group text line says, I saw on Twitter that they have not ruled out AI for selection in the future, which would be similar to the BCS. Well, we welcome in somebody who knows all about the BCS. We welcome in Brad Eberts, 25 years at ESPN. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. This is the Out of Bounds Show. 105.9 The Zone, ESPN, driven by your next Ford F-150 truck or Ford Explorer at Mac Hike Ford, I-55 North in Jackson. Brad Eberts, good morning. How you doing?
Good morning, Bo. How is everything?
Good. I think I'm doing better than, Greg Sankey is at the Bellagio in Las Vegas. So things aren't that bad, but I read the Ross Dellinger article on Yahoo yesterday, and I couldn't help but laugh a little bit because, Sankey's kind of up in arms and acting like he doesn't understand what happened when he knows exactly what happened, as far as why Bama and Ole Miss and South Carolina, didn't make the playoff, Brad.
Well, and the unfortunate thing is that South Carolina probably would have gotten in if they hadn't been directly compared to both Ole Miss and Alabama, who beat them. I think that's what held them back. I mean, if you're looking at, South Carolina versus SMU, I think South Carolina wins that one. The problem is, and you could see this from where the committee put Clemson after winning the ACC championship game. So they're ranked number 17. They beat number 8 on a neutral field, so to speak, and they move up one spot to 16. And the reason they only moved them up is because the head-to-head, and especially the loss to South Carolina, was something the committee felt like, well, it doesn't matter who you just beat. We can't move you ahead of a team that just beat you at your place a game earlier and has the same number of losses. And then, of course, they couldn't move South Carolina up because they got Ole Miss and Alabama sitting right in front of them. And so I think the selection committee traps themselves with some of these criteria that they try to make the be-all, end-all, and that's kind of where you end up because of it. Now, all that said, to your point, and to what Greg Sankey's real issue is, it's that Ole Miss didn't win a game it was supposed to win, which
right.
is at home against Kentucky. Alabama, if they win either of the games at Vanderbilt or at Oklahoma, just win one of the two, then the SEC has a third team. So that's really what it came down to. And if it hadn't been for those extreme circumstances. Now, look, I don't know how often Ole Miss has lost a game like that in the last few years. I know they've gotten better under Kiffin, but I do know that for Alabama, those are the two worst losses they've had in the last 17 years. And they both came this season. And it was too much for the committee to get past. And I understand that. But at the same time, I do understand the argument that's out there about what message does this send about how we should schedule. Because if it really is just the loss column, and if you look at it, it's not, everybody's kind of singling out SMU, but look at Indiana, look at Texas, look at Penn State, Boise State. And if you don't really have to beat, more than one good team, or in some of those cases, they didn't beat any top 25 teams, then it seems like, okay, if it's just about not losing or avoiding losses as much as possible, then what is the motivation to go out there and schedule more difficult games? Now, a lot of people are kind of missing the point. They're looking at Alabama's, and they're like, well, look what Alabama did out of conference. That's not what kept them out. Their out of conference schedule, even though they played at Wisconsin, it turned out they weren't that good. So it wasn't a challenging non-conference schedule.
Right.
Yeah, that's not the point. The point is the next few years when you've got matchups scheduled against Notre Dame home and Ohio State and teams like that, what's the point in playing that game? Because if you lose, the committee's just going to look at it like, okay, that's a loss. And, somebody in the ACC or the Big 12 who played a much, much lesser opponent and didn't lose, well, they're going to come out ahead. And so I think it's a real question that has to be asked. But at the same time, I think a lot's going to change, not next year, but the following year when we have a new format.
I agree. And then there's the debate. Bartu says the SEC's crazy to go to non-conference games.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I know we've talked to you about it over the years, and he's like, look, this is not going to work out. And unless they change the criteria for the playoff selection committee, and it's almost, I know we're trending towards NFL like Brad Edwards, but it's like you can go 9-3 and still get in, kind of like you can go 10-7 right now in the NFL and get in and actually have a chance to win it. You see where I'm going there?
Yeah. I think what they have to figure out is how can they, allow the conferences to kind of settle who their representatives are on the field, in conference play against one another, but at the same time somehow incentivize playing difficult non-conference games, because that's good for the sport. That's what the fans want to see. They want to see the home and home between Alabama and Notre Dame and Alabama and Ohio State. They don't want to see that go away. But you have to make it valuable in some way. And so what I would like to see is some sort of format where, let's just say it goes to 16 teams, where if you say, okay, the SEC is going to get 4, the Big Ten is going to get 4, the ACC is going to get 2, the Big 12 is going to get 2, and then, we've got, I don't know if that leaves 3 at-larges or what it leaves. But you got to have some at-larges in there somewhere so that you give people a reason to go out and challenge themselves out of conference. If it's simply about, okay, if the SEC has 4 bids, top 4 teams in the SEC standings get them, okay, that's great. You are deciding it on the field to a certain extent. You still have to deal with the imbalanced schedules within a league that big, but why are you even playing non-conference games at that point? They don't mean anything. So that's what they have to wrestle with, and that's what they have to come up with an answer to. And what I would love to see, and if you have any listeners who follow like European professional soccer, they'll know what I'm talking about. But the Champions League, they have a format where each of these nations, like their leagues, get a certain number of teams into this tournament each year, but it's not a birthright. And so if over the course of a few years you're losing more games than you're supposed to, you're not earning the right to continue to get that number, then one of your bids is going to go away and it's going to go to somebody else who is earning it. So in other words, if let's say the Big 12 is getting 2 teams every year, if the Big 12 is going 0-2 in the playoffs like 4 years in a row, okay, one of those bids is going to go away. You're only going to get one now, and that bid's going to go to somebody else. And I think you need to have some sort of incentive like that in order to make teams earn it on the field once they get into the playoff. Okay, you give them a certain number of spots to start out with, but if they're not justifying it with their performance in the postseason, then they get some of it taken away. And I think that would be another good approach as far as, okay, we're going to give you an opportunity to be in it, but if you want to get more than one team in, you've got to earn it.
You think they would entertain that type of model?
I hope they would. I hope they would. At the same time, look, I don't want them to ever get to a place where every single bid is predetermined, because to me, that if you don't have any type of mechanism for teams to get in with an at-large, like I said, what's the point of even playing non-conference games? I don't think that even makes sense. But what this does is it allows the conferences to decide how they are going to determine who their teams are. And, and whether that's this just straight conference standings with the tiebreakers applied, or whether there's something else more creative they want to come up with. As far as, maybe they even, I think it was Josh Pate I saw had this, where he was saying, like, maybe if the SEC gets 4 spots, the top 2 teams in the standings are automatically in, and then instead of having a conference championship game, you have a 3 versus 6 and a 4 versus 5 to determine the other 2 spots. And, so however the conferences would want to do it, I think that's fine. You give the committee your 4 teams. Here are our teams. And then at that point, you're leaving less in the committee's hands, right, where they are predominantly just seeding the teams. They're not having to make decisions about, okay, we got this team over on the East Coast and this team over on the West Coast, and they have different records and no common opponents, but we've got to somehow figure out which team is better than the other one. A lot of that goes away if you kind of leave it up to the conferences to give the selection committee their X number of teams that are automatically in.
I like that because the NCAA baseball committee has failed miserably at times trying to balance geographical because we're so strong in the Sun Belt and bring in some other teams. Brad Edwards, 25 years at ESPN, joins us on the Out of Bounds show. ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Do you believe that Sankey and the presidents and the ADs would ever entertain doing away with the SEC championship game?
I'm inclined to say they would, just because it's all about money. I mean, if there's more money to be made doing something else, then I think if you get to a point where the game itself is not intriguing because the stakes aren't high enough, then maybe that's the logical thing to do. And look, if they go to 14 teams, 2 years from now,
which they will,
and which seems to be the odds-on favorite, if they go to 14 teams and there are only 2 first-round buys, and the 2 highest-ranked conference champions get them, 9 times out of 10, the way everything's structured right now, that's going to be the SEC and Big Ten champs. So if that's the case, then you've got to determine that SEC champion on the field. You can't be using a tiebreaker to say, okay, who's getting the bye. You need to play that game. And so I think that game obviously becomes even bigger than it was this year if there are only 2 buys and the winner of the SEC championship is probably going to get one of them. But if you do ever get to a point where, okay, the SEC gets, 4 teams in and maybe nobody's getting a bye or a couple of them are getting buys and the committee's just figuring out how to seed them, then I don't know if you want to put your best teams through that extra game if it's not getting you anything. You risk. I mean, look what happened to Georgia quarterback.
Right.
They would have loved to have not had an SEC. I mean, I know they're happy they won the SEC title, but in the grand scheme of things, it looks like it probably hurt their chances of winning the national title. So, I think if there's nothing significant to gain as far as postseason positioning by winning the SEC championship game, then at that point, the game probably goes away. I don't know if it would go away for every conference, because for some conferences it might be necessary to determine who their one team is.
Right.
But I could certainly see that happening in the SEC, where it does reach a point where it's just not worth doing.
Yeah, Brad Edwards talking college football on the Out of Bounds show. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. I've said that the G5 shouldn't be in, that they need an 8-team playoff, but I understand that the money just from one team getting in supersedes that, Brad. I do think that an 8-team G5 playoff would be compelling, and people would bet on it, and some would watch it, background, whatever, the drill going through the holidays.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they should be in it. Do you think at some point Sankey and Petiti, the Big Ten commissioner, among others, Notre Dame AD president, will basically say, you're out. You need to create your own playoff so that we get another spot?
I think it depends on how the first few years of this format go. I should say this format, the expanded playoff. Like, what does Boise State do? Because I don't think this is a typical year. I think in most years that group of 5 representative is going to be ranked outside of the top 12, and they'll be the 12 seed, and they'll probably get blown out by the 5 seed. But this one is compelling because, now look, I don't think there's any evidence outside of nearly beating Oregon in the second game of the season that they're a top 10 team. They beat UNLV twice. I mean, that's really the basis for their ranking. But obviously, because of the quirk in the seeding, they're sitting there as the number 3 seed. And so now the question is like, are they going to justify having that seed and at least giving, I mean, whether it's Penn State or SMU, but especially if it's Penn State, are they going to justify that seed and giving them a game? Because if this Boise team that the committee had ranked in the top 10 for most of the last, month or however long it is, if they are blown out by a Penn State team that we know can't beat top 5 teams, what does that say about how good the group of 5 representative is going to be in other years? So yeah, I think it really depends, because if Boise, if they hang in there, if they hold their own, they look good, and especially if they were to win, well, then it becomes a lot more difficult to say these teams don't belong. And so I do think some of it has to do with how they perform. And now I'm even looking forward to what does Arizona State do, because the Big 12 to me is just
not good.
It's very difficult for me to gauge how good they are, and I'm inclined to think that they're closer to the G5 than they are to the SEC and the Big 10.
Yeah, they are. As far as their composite recruiter as a whole, as a conference, as you know, they are closer to the G5.
That's the other. I mean, you mentioned the recruiting. It's crazy to me that there are 4 teams in this 12-team playoff that are not top 25 level recruiters. And I'm trying to, so you got Boise, you got Arizona State, you got SMU and Indiana.
Yeah.
And I think those are, I don't think there's another one, but yeah, I mean, I would have said, okay, based on these automatic bids, you probably have like a couple of them sneak in, but yeah, I mean, you've got 2 at-large teams that don't recruit at a top 25 level. And I think that's another thing. Like if those 2 get blown out, if SMU and Indiana were to both get blown out, then I think if you're the committee, then you I think become more skeptical in future seasons when a team that doesn't have a great talent profile manages to kind of get a great draw in the schedule, and they win the games they're supposed to win, and get to this point. Now, I will say, in the case of both of those teams, unlike Alabama, who lost to Vanderbilt, and Ole Miss that lost to Kentucky, week in and week out, Indiana and then SMU, after they changed their starting quarterback, they pretty much did every week what you should do against a lesser opponent. I mean, they blew out most of them.
Game control, man. The committee loves it, Brad. They love game control, right?
They do. They do, and I think it means something though. Like if you're one of the things I struggled with over the last few weeks before Miami took its second loss is like, why is Miami ranked ahead of SMU? Because I get the brand name, and you have a hard time believing SMU could be a better team than Miami. But if you're actually looking at the results, like SMU's going in, most of their games are over, early third quarter, whatever. Miami not only ended up losing 2 games, but they also needed a minor miracle to escape from Virginia Tech and Cal.
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain point, you have to say, you know what, the evidence on the field is showing me that Miami is much more like Georgia Tech, Syracuse, Virginia Tech, and Cal than they are like, some of these teams that we're ranking them in the vicinity of in the polls. And so, I do think it matters how you play these teams. What's the flow of the game And are you winning easily, or are you just escaping? And sometimes are you lucky to escape?
Yeah. Brad Edwards, 25 years at ESPN covering college football. He remembers all those BCS days where I can't imagine. Unbelievable. And starting in 98, I guess.
Yeah.
And now here we are at 12, and I think we're going to expand here sooner than later. All right, so call it. Do you think Sankey and the presidents and ADs can resist the Disney money and not go to 9 games? And do you think they stay at 8, or they say, we got to have it, we're going to 9?
I think it all depends on what they're guaranteed as far as automatic bids into the playoff. If they're guaranteed to get 4 teams in, then having that extra conference game is going to give you a better sample size, a bigger sample size to determine who those 4 teams should be, who are the 4 best teams. So the more games you can play against each other, the better it is to determine who deserves to be in that playoff from the SEC. But if it's more of like, okay, you're going to be compared with the other conferences, then yeah, I don't think you do it. And as we said earlier, even playing, really good opponents out of conference, I think you have to question the logic in it. If the committee is, and look, this is not something that just popped up this year. I mean, let's go back all the way to the beginning of the 4-team model, and outside of the one, the aberration, which is Florida State undefeated, was left out. Obviously, extenuating circumstance with their quarterback being injured and not able to play. I mean, you take that one away, and you don't see 1-loss teams getting in, and you don't see 2-loss teams getting in over 1-loss teams. You don't see 3-loss teams getting in over 2-loss teams now. And if it really is all about the loss column, then yeah, any game that you put on the schedule that's going to increase the possibility of one of your top teams taking a loss, it just seems kind of dumb to do it.
That's 8 more losses, as you know, Brad, in the league.
Yeah,
spread out
for the whole league. Yep.
Okay. All right, my man, that was great. You're going to have to come back more. And December 20th and 21st. We get 1 on the 20th, as you know, and 3 of the games on the 21st. And I can't wait to see how this shakes out. Next time, we got to talk about Ohio State's fan base and how crazy they are. You've traveled all over, and we talk about how crazy Bama is. But Luganville and others say that Ohio State is even worse. And, man, if Ryan Day loses to Tennessee in the first round at home in Columbus, Ohio, holy smokes. I'm not, he'll keep his job, but it'll be a rough off season. Be good, my friend. Thank you, buddy.
All right, man. Take care.
Brad Edwards, 25 years at ESPN. He was their BCS expert and insider. You remember that? For years and years and years, trying to figure it out and rolling it out week to week. We are the Out of Bounds Show, 105.9 The Zone ESPN. We're brought to you by Jake Manning. MSSmartHomes.com. If you want the best game watching experience at your home, you want the Sonos surround sound system powered by MSSmartHomes.com. And it's great whether you're watching Landman, listening to Spotify, or watching an amazing movie powered by MSSmartHomes.com.